Don't do it. The voice was low, sharp, and carried a weight of warning. Dust swirled in the air, caught in beams of harsh sunlight slicing through the jagged walls of the ruin. Ryan's hand hovered over his blaster, his grip steady, his eyes locked on the figure standing before him. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready. Across from him, the armored soldier didn't flinch. The barrel of his rifle aimed straight at Ryan's chest. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Last chance," Ryan said, his voice like steel. "Walk away." The soldier didn't move. Behind them, faint echoes of shouts and the hum of engines drew closer. Taylor Vereen crouched in the shadows, her breath shallow. She had seen fear before, but not in Ryan's eyes. The first shot cracked the air. Before those moments happened, the build-up took some time. Earlier in the mission, the harsh winds of the desert planet Arden 4 whipped across the barren landscape as Commander Taylor Vereen stepped off her sleek transport craft. Her armor, a blend of sleek metallic plates and ceremonial insignias of her people, reflected the glaring sunlight. She scanned the horizon, her sharp eyes narrowing on the faint outline of a small human settlement nestled against the cliffs. This was where she would find Ryan Cale, if the rumors were true. Ryan Cale's name carried weight in the galactic histories of her people. Once a feared warlord leading devastating campaigns, his name alone could strike terror into even the bravest soldiers. But Ryan had disappeared a decade ago, vanishing like a ghost, leaving only whispers of regret and betrayal in his wake. For Taylor, the man she sought wasn't a relic of fear, but a symbol of potential redemption. Her people were suffocating under a regime as ruthless as Ryan had once been, and she believed he was the only one who could help. As Taylor approached the settlement, the air grew heavy with tension. The villagers, clad in worn clothing patched with makeshift repairs, stopped their work to stare at the alien visitor. Their eyes, wary but curious, tracked her every move. The settlement was a patchwork of weathered metal buildings and sturdy tents, clearly cobbled together from salvaged materials. She approached a group of villagers who had gathered near an irrigation system. "I'm looking for Ryan Cale," she announced, her voice firm but diplomatic. "Is he here?" The villagers exchanged nervous glances before one finally spoke. "Why do you want to find him?" Taylor hesitated for a moment, sensing their caution. "I need his help. It's a matter of life and death for my people, and perhaps yours." Before the villager could respond, a voice rang out from the shadows of a nearby building. "You've come a long way to look for trouble, Commander." Taylor turned sharply, her hand instinctively hovering near her sidearm. A tall, rugged man stepped into the light, his broad shoulders clad in a simple leather vest over a tattered undershirt. His face was weathered, marked by scars and 1,000 untold stories, but his piercing gray eyes were as sharp as blades. "Ryan Cale." The villagers stepped back, their reverence and fear for the man evident. Taylor held her ground, her gaze meeting his unflinchingly. "Ryan Cale," she said, her tone steady. "I've come to ask for your aid." Ryan crossed his arms, leaning casually against the side of the building. "Aid?" he echoed, his voice laced with sarcasm. "And what makes you think I'd help someone like you?" Taylor took a step forward. "Because I know what you're capable of. Your reputation precedes you." He smirked, shaking his head. "My reputation's exactly why you should turn around and leave, whatever you've heard about me. Commander, it's not wrong. I'm not the man you're looking for, but you're exactly the man I need." Taylor pressed, her voice rising with urgency. "My people are enslaved under a brutal regime, one that mirrors what you once led. You know their tactics, their strategies. Because they were yours, you can help us break free." Ryan's smirk faded, his expression hardening. "I walked away from that life for a reason. I'm no hero, Commander. I'm just a man trying to survive." Taylor's frustration bubbled to the surface. "Survive? Is that all you care about? You have a chance to make amends for the destruction you caused, to save lives instead of taking them. Ryan's jaw tightened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Before he could respond, the sound of a loud explosion echoed in the distance. Both turned toward the source of the noise, smoke rising from the edge of the settlement. "They've found me," Taylor muttered under her breath, drawing her weapon. Ryan frowned, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Who's they?" "The regime," Taylor replied, her voice tense. "They must have tracked my ship. They'll destroy this village just to get to me." Ryan sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "You really brought a mess to my doorstep, didn't you?" Taylor turned to him, her eyes fierce. "You can walk away, or you can help me stop them. The choice is yours." Ryan hesitated, glancing at the frightened villagers who were scrambling for cover. He cursed under his breath, then reached for a worn blaster from his belt. "Fine, but when this is over, you're leaving." Taylor nodded, her resolve unshaken. "Let's deal with them first." Together, they sprinted toward the edge of the settlement, where a group of armored soldiers was advancing. Ryan moved with precision and calm, his every step betraying the instincts of a seasoned warrior. As they took cover behind a low wall, Taylor couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he handled himself, his presence commanding even in the chaos. "Ready?" Ryan asked, his voice steady. Taylor nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. "Let's see what you've got." "Warrior," Ryan smirked, then leapt into action, firing with deadly accuracy. The soldiers, caught off guard by his sudden assault, faltered under the barrage. Taylor joined him, her own skills honed from years of combat, and together they moved like a well-practiced team. As the dust settled and the last soldier fell, Ryan lowered his weapon, his expression unreadable. Taylor turned to him, her chest heaving. "Still think you're not the man I'm looking for?" Ryan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Don't get used to it." "Commander!" But as they returned to the village, the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that Taylor's words had struck a chord deep within him, a reminder of who he was, and who he might still become. The battle had been swift, brutal, and decisive. The smoking ruins of the ambush lay behind them, as Ryan and Taylor returned to the village. The people watched in awe as Ryan strode through the main street, his weapon lowered but his presence commanding. For years, the villagers had relied on his quiet protection without truly knowing the man who guarded them. Today, they saw a different side of him, a side that terrified them. Taylor walked beside him, her steps quick to keep up. "You've got talent, I'll give you that," she said, breaking the tense silence. "But that precision, the way you moved out there, none of it says simple protector." Ryan didn't respond, his expression set like stone. He kept his focus on the path ahead, avoiding the eyes of the villagers who whispered as he passed. Taylor pressed on, unwilling to let him retreat into his stoic shell. "You've done this before," she continued. "The way you command a battlefield, the way you calculate every move, that doesn't come from defending a few farmers from raiders." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of something else. Regret, perhaps, or pain. "And what would you know about it?" he asked, his voice low. "You don't know me. I know enough." Taylor shot back. "I know your name used to strike fear into my people. I know you led campaigns that devastated entire planets. I know you vanished without a trace after your last war. So tell me, Ryan Keel, why are you hiding in a place like this?" Ryan's jaw tightened, his hand flexing around the strap of his rifle. For a moment, it seemed he wouldn't answer, but then he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" he said, his tone bitter. "That I'm some monster who ran from his crimes. Maybe I am. But let me make one thing clear. I didn't hide here. I came here to forget." Taylor frowned, crossing her arms. "Forget what? The people you killed?" His gaze hardened, and she immediately regretted the jab. But instead of lashing out, Ryan looked away, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The people I couldn't save. The weight of his words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Taylor watched him closely, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. This wasn't just a man running from his past. This was a man haunted by it. Before she could respond, the sound of engines roared in the distance. Ryan's head snapped up, his sharp instincts kicking in. "We're not done," he said, moving quickly toward a lookout point at the edge of the village. "They'll send more." Taylor followed, her frustration momentarily set aside. "The regime won't stop until they have me. If you're going to keep fighting, you need to know what you're up against." Ryan climbed a craggy outcrop overlooking the desert. His eyes scanned the horizon, narrowing as he spotted a line of dust trails approaching from the east. "Tell me," he said, his voice steady. "The regime is expanding," Taylor began, enslaving entire colonies to fuel their war machine. "They've already taken dozens of systems, mine included. My people are barely surviving, scattered and hiding. That's why I need you. You've faced enemies like them before. You know how they think." Ryan nodded slowly, his focus never leaving the horizon. "They think they're unstoppable, that their power makes them invincible. I used to think the same." "And?" Taylor asked, her voice soft. "And that's why they'll fall," he said, his tone resolute. "Arrogance blinds you to the cracks in your armor. They have a weakness, we just have to find it." Taylor stared at him, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. This was the man she needed. Not the broken protector he pretended to be, but the strategist, the warrior who could turn the tide of a war. The dust trails grew closer, and the faint outline of armored vehicles came into view. Ryan stepped down from the outcrop, his movements calm and deliberate. "We don't have much time. If you're staying, Commander, you'd better follow my lead." Taylor smirked, drawing her weapon. "I'll try to keep up." Ryan gathered the villagers, instructing them to take cover in the deeper caves surrounding the settlement. Taylor noted how quickly they obeyed, their trust in him evident despite their fear. As the last of the civilians retreated, Ryan turned to her. "This is going to get ugly," he said, "and stick to the high ground. Cover me when I move." Taylor nodded, her confidence growing. "Let's see what you've got, warrior." The first wave of enemy vehicles crested the dunes, their turrets swiveling toward the village. Ryan moved like a phantom, darting between cover and firing precise shots that disabled the lead vehicle. Taylor provided suppressive fire, picking off soldiers who tried to flank him. The battle was fierce, the regime's forces relentless, but Ryan's tactics turned the tide, forcing the enemy into disarray. When the final vehicle erupted in flames, silence fell over the desert. Taylor approached Ryan, who stood amidst the wreckage, his weapon lowered. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Still think I'm the man you're looking for?" he asked, his voice heavy. Taylor nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're exactly who I'm looking for," Ryan sighed, shaking his head. "Don't get your hopes up, Commander. This was just survival." But deep down, Taylor knew there was more to him than he let on. She had seen it in his actions, in the way he fought not for glory, but to protect the innocent, and she was determined to show him that his past didn't have to define his future. The sun dipped low over the desert horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield littered with smoldering wreckage. Ryan and Taylor stood in the eerie silence, their breathing heavy. Though they had repelled the attack, both knew the reprieve was temporary. The regime would regroup, and next time, they wouldn't send a mere scouting force. As they returned to the village, Taylor studied Ryan carefully. His calm exterior hadn't cracked during the fight, but she could see the weight he carried in the way his shoulders tensed and his jaw clenched. He was preparing himself, not just for another battle, but for the burden of what came next. The villagers greeted them with hushed awe, their relief mingling with unease. They had seen Ryan fight before, but never like this. His efficiency, his ruthlessness, It reminded them of the stories they had heard, stories they'd hoped were exaggerated. The protector they knew was a man of quiet strength, but today they had glimpsed the warlord he once was. "Ryan," a young boy called out, breaking the uneasy quiet. The boy's wide eyes sparkled with admiration as he ran to Ryan, clutching a crude wooden toy shaped like a soldier. "You were amazing. You saved us all." Ryan knelt down, his expression softening as he ruffled the boy's hair. "Just doing what needed to be done, kid." Taylor watched the exchange, her chest tightening. This was the side of Ryan she wanted to believe in, the side that cared, that protected. But she knew the battle had stirred something darker in him, something he struggled to keep buried. Once the villagers dispersed, Taylor approached him. "We need to talk." Ryan leaned against a weathered wall, crossing his arms. "Figured as much. You can't keep fighting like this," Taylor said, her voice firm. "You're one man against an empire. The next time they come, they'll bring everything they've got." "And what do you suggest?" Ryan asked, his tone sharp. "For that I just roll over and let them take this place?" "Let them take you?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "I'm suggesting you stop running from what you are." Ryan's gaze darkened. "And what exactly am I, Commander?" Taylor didn't flinch. "You're a warrior, a strategist, someone who knows how to lead, how to inspire. You're not just a man protecting a village. You're someone who can make a difference on a much bigger scale." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You think I don't know what happens when people follow me? I've led armies before, Taylor, and all it brought was death and destruction. You're not that man anymore." Taylor said softly, "You're not the scourge of Velixar. You're Ryan Kale, and you have a choice. You can keep punishing yourself for your past, or you can use what you've learned to fight for something that matters." Ryan stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant wind howling through the ruins. Before he could respond, a villager ran up to them, panic etched across her face. "There's movement on the horizon," she said breathlessly. "A large force. They're coming back." Ryan straightened, his gaze shifting to the lookout post. "How far?" "Maybe an hour," the villager replied. "And there's a lot more of them this time." Ryan turned to Taylor, his voice grim. "Looks like your regime isn't wasting time." Taylor clenched her fists. "We can't hold them off alone." Ryan was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the village. Then he nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then it's time to stop thinking like a protector and start thinking like a commander." He climbed onto a makeshift platform in the center of the village, calling the people to gather. When they had assembled, he addressed them with a calm authority that left no room for doubt. "We're outnumbered, and they're better equipped," he said. "But this village is our home, and I won't let them take it. If we fight smart, we can survive this." The villagers murmured anxiously, but Ryan raised a hand to silence them. "I'm going to need every able body to help. Barricade the entrances, reinforce the weak points. Those who can fight, arm yourselves. Those who can't, take the children and elderly to the caves." Taylor watched as the villagers nodded, their fear giving way to determination. Ryan's words carried a weight that inspired trust, even in the face of overwhelming odds. When the villagers dispersed to prepare, Taylor stepped up beside him. "You're a natural leader. You know that?" Ryan smirked faintly. "Don't get used to it." When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in shadows, the two of them stood side by side, watching the distant lights of the advancing enemy. The battle ahead would be unlike any the villagers had faced. But for the first time, Taylor felt they had a fighting chance. She glanced at Ryan, his face set with grim determination. Whatever demons he carried, she could see now that he wasn't defined by them. He was a man searching for redemption, and this battle might just be the first step toward finding it.